Hello and welcome back to the Herefordshire Gardener channel. My name's Aaron. Today's video is going to be about the annual and perennial cornflowers, two of my absolute favourite plants to include in the borders of the garden. The three varieties of cornflower that I chose to grow include Blue Ball, Classic Magic, and finally Classic Romantic. I grew all of my annual cornflowers from seed in February this year. As you can see, the seeds are quite small and have a bristly top to them. I like to give all of my seeds a little bit of a head start by giving them an initial soak for a few days between a few layers of moistened tissue paper in a weak hydrogen peroxide solution. I place this inside a bag just to keep everything nice and moist, and within a few days the seeds are starting to sprout, as you can see here. I use the weak hydrogen peroxide solution just to ensure that there's no growth of bacteria or mould at this stage. Here's a close-up shot of one of the seeds that has sprouted. You can see here the new root with the tiny root hairs that have developed. The next step for me is to take a seed tray, pop in some seed compost, and using the end of a pen or something similar, just place some light indentations into which I'll place approximately 6 seeds per cell just to save on space. I'll then cover this lightly with some more of the seed mixture and just firm things in gently and ensure that this just remains moist throughout the growing period. It only takes a few days for the seedlings to start to appear, and initially you'll see the seed leaves or the cotyledons appear, which look almost circular and quite chunky. They're very different to what we call the true leaves of the plant, and they essentially just provide the energy the plant needs to make a good start. Eventually you will see the appearance of the true plant leaves, the first ones to appear between the set of seed leaves. I don't actually have a greenhouse in the garden, would you believe, yet. That's something that's definitely on the cards in the coming 1 to 2 years, and so I purchased a couple of temporary greenhouses from my local garden centre. These have enabled me to grow a large number of seeds this year in a relatively small space. It just goes to show what's actually possible. I kept the seedlings in these temporary greenhouses and just ensured that the seed compost remained moist at all times. And over the weeks they put on a lot of new growth, and eventually I could see roots coming out of the bottom of these seed trays. This is the point that I decided to pot them on into 7cm pots, 2 per pot. I took some multi-purpose compost and mixed that with some vermiculite to give me a nice loose mixture, and then taking the 7cm pots, I simply just filled a large number of these up, ready to accommodate the seedlings. And then I have an extra tray spare filled with water, just so I can stand the newly potted seedlings into this to allow them to soak up water. You can see here we've got some nice root development on those seedlings. Then just taking the end of a pen to simply pop a hole into one of the pots, holding the seedling by its seed leaves as not to damage the plant. Just gently pop it in and firm it in with a little bit of the soil. I place 2 seedlings per pot to save space again. These can be separated later when it comes to planting out. Once all the seedlings were potted up and watered well, I kept them indoors for a few days, and gradually for several hours at a time I popped them in these large trays outdoors. Once they had hardened off after about a week, I was able to leave them out permanently, and just keeping an eye out, because it was February, for any frosts. I made sure that I brought them indoors for those evenings. It was a little bit of extra work to do this each evening, but it saved me a lot of money on buying plants later in the year. I planted them out into the rose room at the end of April, start of May, hoping that I'll avoid any frost. Luckily they weren't anything too drastic. And so gently taking them out of the 7 centimeter pots, you'll see here there's really good root development at this point. I then separated this into 2 plants, ensuring each one had a good amount of roots, and firmed these into the plant beds with some fresh compost. Apart from future staking to support the plant, it didn't require much attention from me after this point of planting. I'm next going to briefly talk about the perennial cornflower, or the Centuria montana. We have a patch of these at the bottom of the garden, and I'd planned to dig and divide these up, which worked really well. I managed to get about 2 of these buckets full of the plants, and we have whites, pinks, and a violet colour. Really good root structure on these already. I think they've been down here for quite some time. Very easy to plant in the soil, and they started to put on growth remarkably quick. These perennial cornflowers I think started flowering at the end of April, start of May, so they were quite early in the rose room. I think we had some of the early spring flowers out, such as the tulips, the muscari, and the forget-me-not, so this was a really nice addition of colour at this point. But I continued to deadhead them regularly, and I've still got them in flower, and we're at the end of July, which is absolutely awesome. This is definitely one of my favourite perennial flowers in the garden. I love the shape and colour of the blooms, and the texture and silvery shades of the foliage. The annual cornflower, particularly the blue ball variety, started to appear in the room around about the start of June. It's real intense, deep blue colour, looked absolutely fantastic against the magentas of the rose campion and the soft yellows of the Cicericium, and also the roses, which just complement each other wonderfully. The blue cornflower is a slender plant bearing pretty flowers in rich shades of blue. It's commonly used in annual meadow schemes, and it makes an excellent cut flower. The thistle-like flower buds open and are surrounded by a wonderful topaz blue arrangement of petals, and these are extremely attractive to bees, butterflies and moths, as they are very rich in nectar and pollen. I focus on keeping my cornflowers deadheaded regularly, and that just means cutting off faded blooms. This encourages the plant to produce more new flower buds and hopefully keeps them flowering all summer long. In the later summer weeks, I'll let a lot of these flowers go to seed, as they do provide a tasty treat for the birds, which seem to really enjoy them. The plants tend to grow to a height of around about 30 centimeters with a spread of 45 centimeters. They do really enjoy a full sun position, so do try to give them that if you can. One of the added benefits of cornflowers in general is that they do really well in poor soil, so they don't need any special fertilizer or anything like this. As mentioned earlier, the stems are not extremely strong, and so they will require some form of support. In my beds, I've used netting, which now looks invisible as all the plants have grown through it, but I also use periodically bamboo canes just to give that added extra bit of support where it's needed. I find also that by growing other annuals and perennials, like here the Ami majus and also the rose campion, which we saw earlier, these provide a really good lattice network with strong stems through which the cornflowers can grow, and so they benefit from that extra support also. It's more of a naturalistic look as well, I find, so it's just using what you've got to work with each other really, which just avoids the overuse of things like bamboo canes, string and netting. I love how the cornflower really acts like a glue in these borders. It's a continuity that weaves in and out of all the other plants. I think it really does help to just gel everything together. As the blue cornflower blooms age, they do actually fade to a pale blue through to white, and this does tend to give the illusion that there are several different blooms on the same plant, which is lovely really. Once the blooms start to fade and fall apart, this is the point at which I'll just simply snip them off, and I'll just make a small sharp cut directly below where the bloom actually is. Sometimes I will cut the stem back a little bit, but what you will find is that new blooms will form on that very same stem, so try not to cut it back too far. It's so wonderful to see the perennial cornflowers still in flower. These wonderful plants are native to the mountains and meadows and the woodlands of continental Europe. They also bear a greeny grey silvery lance-like foliage which complements the beautiful large deep blue, violet or white spidery flower heads. They're also very attractive to bees, butterflies and moths. The perennial cornflowers will reach a height of about 45 centimetres and they will spread to about 60 centimetres. They're fully hardy and they also enjoy full sun but will do quite well in dappled shade. I could not imagine these borders without these splashes of blue, white and violet. These are such incredible low maintenance plants. I would highly recommend them in any of your borders if you haven't done so already. Hopefully this video is showing you just how easy it is to create so many of these plants in such a small amount of space and for relatively little cost. If you're already growing them, you'll probably agree with me that they are a wonderful sight to behold. They really do look amazing with other plants such as roses, delphiniums, larkspurs, the Verbena bonariensis, and of course the rose campions. And although these plants are highly attracted to pollinating insects, I've actually not seen that many bees and butterflies sadly so far this year, and I'm not entirely sure if that's related to the very wet spring that we've had. But what I have noticed is that I'm not the only one that's seeing far fewer numbers of pollinating insects just in general in the garden this year. Hopefully it's just a blip and it's got a lot to do with the weather, and perhaps maybe we'll start to see more of these wonderful creatures in the garden in the coming weeks. We can keep our fingers crossed. This is a good example of how the blooms fade. You can see here we've got pale blue in this cornflower, and then we've got the fresh blue as the blooms open. Eventually they fade to white and they will shrivel up. I just love this combination, and I love the way that they capture the sunlight. They just dance in the wind. Occasionally you'll see a bee bobbing from flower to flower in search of nectar and pollen. It's just so magical. This is one of the Cornflower Classic Romantic, and you can see there we've got white outer petals with a pink centre, and there's some sort of pollinator enjoying that one today. This one here is an example of the Cornflower Classic Magic. You can see those shades of lilac, darker towards the centre, blissfully bobbing in the wind. As I move around this rose room, you'll see we move into the borders, which harbour quite a lot of shade throughout the first part of the day. They do get afternoon sun and evening sun. You can see here the cornflowers are doing perfectly well, and they actually take on a darker shade of blue in the shade, which is quite nice in contrast amongst everything else that's here. I hope you found this video interesting and useful today. If you do have any questions on any of the processes that I've followed, or any other questions for that matter of fact, please just leave them in the comment section. Remember to support the channel, and to encourage more content, please give the video a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's the Herefordshire Gardener. Thanks again for stopping by and watching the video. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday and of course the weekend ahead. Take care, enjoy the rest of the video. Bye bye.